Snow blanketed the small town like a silent cover, muffling sounds and filling the air with a chill that somehow felt welcoming. On a quiet street, the last house at the end of the lane displayed twinkling lights flashing almost in rhythm, reflecting the inevitable Christmas spirit of the season. Inside the house, the atmosphere was a mix of warmth and concealed tension. The table was impeccable, set with the kind of dedication only the experience of a matriarch could provide. Margaret Hargrove oversaw every detail, from the gleam of the silverware to the arrangement of the china that had belonged to her grandmother. The decor exuded tradition, as if the effort to maintain a perfect ambience could somehow erase the cracks in the family dynamic. Richard, the eldest son, seemed out of place, moving stiffly as he remained in his chair, his plate almost untouched before him. The weight of something unspoken seemed to pull him down, reflected in how his eyes avoided direct contact. Peter, the patriarch, was even more reserved. Sitting at the head of the table, he appeared distant, as if his very presence in the room was a calculated effort. Anne, the youngest, was as present as she was absent. Her gestures, though gentle, were mechanical. She pushed her food around on her plate as if the act of eating were too burdensome. Beyond the aroma of holiday spices, there was something else in the air, a dense energy composed of prolonged silences and averted gazes. Despite the fireplace's glow and the clinking glasses during the closing toast, the evening did not feel like a harmonious Christmas. A subtle but persistent tension hovered over everyone like an invisible shadow. That house, so perfectly decorated for Christmas, hid secrets that would sooner or later come to light. Behind the well-rehearsed appearance of the evening lay a reality that no ornament could conceal. The Hargrove family was a mosaic of tensions accumulated over the years, small fissures that, at that moment, seemed on the brink of becoming chasms. Margaret had always prided herself on keeping the family together, but every meticulous gesture of perfection concealed the weight of a dynamic far from harmonious. Richard, the eldest, was on the verge of collapse. His financial failure, carefully kept secret from most, had not gone unnoticed by his mother. Margaret knew more than she let on, and her refusal to help him had been a harsh blow. It was a silent conflict, laden with mutual resentments and unspoken words that hovered like ghosts between the two. Anne, on the other hand, felt trapped. Her life was a constant attempt to please everyone, especially her mother. She knew Margaret disapproved of her choices, particularly her recent relationship. The threat of being disinherited loomed over her like a suspended blade, and every moment in her mother's presence was fraught with veiled tension, a battle fought without words. Peter, Margaret's husband, occupied a peculiar position. Reserved and often distant, he seemed uninterested in getting involved in the conflicts that permeated the house. His silence, however, was not mere passivity. There was something in his eyes, a kind of somber resignation, as if he knew the peace in that house was merely a disguise for something much more unstable. The evening dragged on slowly, as if time hesitated to continue. The dinner toast, though brief, left a bitter aftertaste, and each attendee seemed lost in their own thoughts. As Margaret arranged the last details in the kitchen, the others avoided looking at one another, each too absorbed in their own secrets to notice the signs beginning to align. On the surface, everything seemed controlled, but the balance of that night was precarious. The house, so brightly lit and festive, seemed to harbor something far darker within its walls. Something that would not remain hidden for long. When dinner finally ended, the house descended into a strange silence. Margaret, pleased to have orchestrated another Christmas dinner her way, announced she was going upstairs to rest. Her footsteps ascending the stairs echoed through the house, a sound that seemed louder than usual, as if the very space amplified her presence. Soon, the sound of the bedroom door closing was the last thing to break the silence upstairs. In the living room, the others remained in an almost automatic state. Richard sat in an armchair, staring into the void, while distractedly flipped through a photo album left on the coffee table. Peter, from the corner of the room, observed the two with an almost clinical gaze, his hands firmly crossed in his lap. The clock on the wall struck 10:15 when the scream rang out. It was a sharp, desperate sound, something that immediately froze everyone in the room. For a moment, no one moved, as if the shock had paralyzed them. Then panic set in. Richard was the first to rise, followed by Anne, while Peter remained motionless for a few seconds before finally heading upstairs. In Margaret's bedroom, the scene was devastating. Her body lay near the bed, her eyes open but vacant, as if life had been taken in an instant. There were marks around her neck, red stains that spoke for themselves. The once orderly bedroom looked chaotic, the bed was unmade, a chair was overturned, and a broken pearl necklace was scattered across the floor. Panic gave way to a current of conflicting emotions. Richard appeared confused, breathing heavily, while Anne stood frozen near the door, unable to move. Peter, on the other hand, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. There was something on his face, a mixture of shock and something more difficult to decipher. The carefully constructed harmony of the evening was shattered. What remained was a house full of questions, as the snow continued to fall outside, silent and indifferent. Margaret's bedroom, once a haven of serenity, was now a scene of disorder exuding a sense of something deeply wrong. Every detail seemed to carry a new weight, as if the space, steeped in violence, told the story of what had occurred there moments before. Margaret's body remained motionless by the bed, her posture revealing the struggle she had endured in her final moments. The marks on her neck were an unmistakable signature of strangulation, something no one in the room had the courage to mention aloud. The broken pearl necklace near her body seemed like a clue, its beads scattered across the carpet like silent witnesses to the brutal act. Richard was the first to take a few hesitant steps toward the body but stopped abruptly, as if something prevented him from getting closer. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that might make sense. His breathing was short and irregular, betraying the agitation he was trying, unsuccessfully, to disguise. Anne, still near the door, couldn't look away. There was something in her face that seemed to be more than just shock. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps guilt, but nothing in her behavior provided clear answers. She clutched her hands to her chest, as if trying to protect herself from something invisible. Peter, on the other hand, seemed to observe the scene with an unsettling coldness. He approached slowly, his steps methodical, and looked around as if processing the details. His gaze went directly to the necklace, then to the unmade bed, and finally to Anne's feet. A footprint on the carpet caught his attention, and he crouched to examine it carefully. The chaos in the bedroom was more than visual. It was as if something had changed in the very essence of the environment, transforming the once familiar space into something hostile and claustrophobic. Outside, the night remained calm, the contrast with the internal scene making everything even more disturbing. The house, illuminated by its Christmas decorations, now felt like a prison, as the family began to realize that no one there was above suspicion. The arrival of the police brought a sense of urgency to the house but also of unease. The emergency lights flashing in the lane seemed to be the only indication to the outside world that something terrible had happened there. Inside the house, the officers moved with professionalism, but the tension among the family members was palpable. The first moments were dedicated to preserving the scene. Photographs were taken, objects catalogued, and the body's position analyzed carefully. One of the investigators, a middle-aged man with keen eyes, focused on the strangulation marks. He pointed to the broken necklace and the footprint on the carpet, which quickly became items of interest. The interrogations began. Each family member was taken to different rooms in the house to give their statements, their accounts filled with inconsistencies and hesitations. Richard, still visibly agitated, claimed he had been in the kitchen looking for something to eat when he heard the scream. He said he ran immediately to the bedroom but couldn't explain why he seemed so nervous. His hands trembled, and he avoided making eye contact with the officer. Anne, on the other hand, appeared more composed, but her voice trembled slightly as she said she had been in the bathroom at the time of the scream. When asked about the pearl necklace, she hesitated before claiming it was hers but said she had no idea how it ended up there. Her eyes, however, constantly shifted to the floor, as if avoiding something. Peter gave the most straightforward account. He stated that he had been sitting in the living room when everything happened, but no one seemed to have noticed his presence until the moment of the scream. He explained this as a reflection of his reserved nature, but his calm, almost indifferent posture raised suspicions. He was also the only one to mention hearing muffled voices from upstairs before the incident. As the statements were collected, neighbors approached to find out what was happening. One mentioned hearing a heated argument earlier that evening but couldn't identify whose voices they were. This detail, though vague, added another layer of mystery to the case. As the night wore on, the sense of uncertainty grew. The emerging details began to align, but the central piece of the puzzle was still missing. The house, which should have been a refuge of warmth and celebration, was now a stage of inquiry and distrust, where no one was completely above suspicion. The unfolding investigation seemed to bring more questions than answers. Each revealed detail unearthed layers of tension buried deep within the family dynamic. The investigators, realizing the crime had likely been committed by someone within the house, began to press the family members more incisively. The first conflicts arose between Richard and Anne. During a break in the investigation, while waiting for the next round of questions, the two crossed paths in the hallway. Richard shot an accusatory look, which she returned with an expression of distrust. The tension between them, previously veiled, began to unravel into fragments of guilt and silent accusations. In the interrogation room, Richard was confronted with inconsistencies in his story. He had mentioned going to the kitchen for dessert, but the police found no evidence of his presence there during the incident. Under pressure, he stammered, changing details of his account. His defensive posture began to raise suspicions, especially when the investigators pointed out that he had financial motives to be in conflict with his mother. And also faced her own contradictions. She had claimed the pearl necklace was hers but couldn't explain why it was in her mother's bedroom. The officers pressed her, questioning if she had gone upstairs that night. Her hesitation in responding was enough for a shadow of doubt to fall over her. Peter, on the other hand, remained cold and distant. When confronted about the voices he claimed to have heard, he said he couldn't identify who was arguing. His indifferent posture, however, did not go unnoticed. The investigators noted that he seemed more focused on observing the others than on defending his own innocence. Then came the first major twist. A more detailed analysis of the bedroom revealed that the footprint on the carpet matched the shoe Anne was wearing that night. When confronted with the evidence, she was visibly shaken but insisted she had not gone to her mother's room. Her denial, however, sounded increasingly less convincing. Simultaneously, investigators discovered that Richard had argued with Margaret a week earlier when she refused to help him financially. One of the neighbors confirmed hearing shouting in the house on that occasion, connecting Richard even further to the growing web of suspicion. The tension in the house was unbearable. Each family member seemed at their breaking point, carrying the weight of their own secrets while trying to uncover those of others. The bonds that united them were being eroded, and the cracks were exposed for all to see. There was a sense that a dark truth was about to emerge, but no one knew for certain who would be the first to break. It was inevitable that, under increasing pressure, someone would break. The tension hovered over the house like a storm ready to explode. Each family member seemed suffocated by their own secrets, but it was Richard who finally broke the silence. The eldest son, with a trembling voice and a dejected posture, admitted to having gone to Margaret's room that night. He began by explaining what he described as an attempt at reconciliation. After weeks of accumulated resentment, Richard claimed he wanted to apologize to his mother for his outburst during their previous argument when she refused to help him financially. However, he soon admitted that the encounter in the bedroom took an unexpected turn. Margaret confronted him, recalling his failures and insisting that he needed to take responsibility for his choices. According to Richard, she mentioned that she could no longer support his demands. At that moment, according to his version, he lost control. Margaret's words, laden with disappointment, were like a spark in a powder keg. He confessed that he grabbed her by the neck, initially as an impulsive act, with no clear intent. But as his anger grew, the situation spiraled out of control. When he realized what he had done, it was already too late. The confession shocked everyone. Anne, who had been carrying her own shadow of guilt, seemed incredulous. Peter, however, showed no surprise. His eyes remained fixed on Richard as he described the events, almost as if he had already anticipated this outcome. The investigators, though satisfied with the confession, still analyzed the details cautiously. The broken necklace on the floor, the footprints, and Richard's defensive posture aligned with his account, but some questions remained unanswered. Why was Margaret wearing Anne's necklace? And why didn't Peter, who was downstairs during the scream, react immediately? Despite the gaps, the truth about what happened in Margaret's bedroom that night began to take shape. Richard, overcome with guilt and despair, was taken into custody, while the house, now in absolute silence, remained a mute witness to the tragedy that had unfolded under its roof. Richard's confession formally ended the investigation, but the wounds opened that night were far from healing. The house, which just hours earlier had been decorated to celebrate Christmas, now felt like a mausoleum of dark memories. The blinking lights of the decorations contrasted with the void left by the tragedy. Richard was taken away by the police, his last words to the family being a murmured apology. The pain in his eyes was evident, but the weight of his actions was something he would have to bear alone. Still, some doubts lingered. He had confessed to the crime, but certain details of the scene, like Anne's necklace and Peter's reaction, continued to leave an uneasy feeling, as if not everything had come to light. And completely withdrew from the family. Her connection with them, already fragile, seemed to have been destroyed. The shadow of guilt that hung over her, even after Richard's confession, was something no one could explain. Could it be that she knew more than she had revealed? Investigators found no direct evidence against her, but doubt regarding her role that night persisted. Peter, for his part, remained as silent as ever. He seemed more resigned than shaken, as if the tragedy was something he had already anticipated on some level. When the police finished their work, he began dismantling the house. The Christmas tree was the first to go, the ornaments packed away as if the simple act of removing them could erase the events of the previous night. The community was shocked by the case, particularly by the brutality of the act and the timing of its occurrence. Christmas, which should symbolize unity and celebration, became a bitter reminder of destruction and loss. For many, the Hargrove house became a dark symbol, a place to be avoided. A few weeks later, Peter sold the property and left town. And completely disappeared from the community's radar, and Richard faced trial for homicide. The case was closed, but the scars it left continued to resonate among those who had lived through it. In the end, that Christmas was remembered not for its lights or gifts, but for a crime that destroyed a family and left one lingering question: what really happened in that house? Perhaps, like many secrets, the full truth would never be known.